So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We'd like to thank you for being here today. And I'm Ali Kavalauskas, an intern at Arigato, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's webinar. So on behalf of Arigato International and the International Consortium on Nurturing Spirituality in Early Childhood for the Prevention of Violence, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar where we will listen to and reflect upon the implementation of the toolkit on the spiritual development of children. Before we begin, I would like to just share some housekeeping rules with you. So first, please be sure to add your name add to your name the organization or country you are connecting from. And regarding the chat, we welcome you to utilize the chat to introduce yourselves to one another and engage with one another there to share reflections, comments, or ask questions. However, you can also share your questions to the panelists or the speakers through the Q&A section. And finally, AI interpretation is available in English, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, French, Urdu, Swahili, Tamil, German, and Hindi. However, please note that in certain moments, like when the sound quality is not good, the AI interpretation may not be accurate. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to my colleague Francisco Vila, Head of Programs at Arigato International Geneva, who will start us off with the objectives of today's webinar.
Hi everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. As Ali was explaining, today we are aiming to reflect on the role of positive face-sensitive parenting in addressing violence in early childhood and how it promote the protection of violence for children. To showcase evidence of findings from the diverse countries' experiences, illustrating how nurturing children's spiritual development contributes to this. And finally, to provide recommendations to organizations on how to integrate faith-sensitive approaches in parenting and holistic child development. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor now to Dr. Siobhan Fitzpatrick, Regional Vice Chair from the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, so that she can give us the opening remarks for today. Siobhan, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and greetings from Ireland. On behalf of the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, I would like to thank Arigato for their invitation to participate in today's important and timely webinar. We in the Early Childhood Peace Consortium value our strong partnership with Arigato and endorse the critical work that you're doing in ensuring that the importance of the spiritual development of young children is realised. We also very much appreciate the support that you have given us in Early Childhood Peace Consortium on our recent Stop the War on All Children campaign. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child recognises the right to spiritual development in a similar and equal way that it recognises children's rights for cognitive, physical, social and emotional development. However, for too long, the right for spiritual development has been a much neglected and sometimes contentious field of interest in early childhood development. The development, implementation and evaluation of the Arigato Toolkit, nurturing the spiritual development of children in the early years, is making a significant contribution to making spiritual rights visible and also to the protection of children from violence and the promotion of their holistic well-being. The toolkit also makes a very important contribution to supporting parents move away from harsh approaches to discipline to approaches based on reflective, responsive, nurturing, respectful caregiving. I really look forward to hearing more about the implementation and evaluation of the toolkit later on in this session from Brazil and Pakistan. Today, however, unfortunately, we face an unprecedented crisis of violence against children across the globe. The recent report from the UN Secretary General documented an unprecedented number of grave violations against children in 2024, and unfortunately a further increase now in 2025. Over 300 million children are impacted by violence across the world, and more studies show that trauma and violence in childhood can permanently affect brain development. But the good news, however, is that the growing evidence suggests that investment in young children, their parents, caregivers, and communities offer a unique opportunity to make a cost-effective and sustainable impact, promoting resilience to toxic stress and disrupting intergenerational cycles of poverty and violence. I congratulate Arigato for making such a significant contribution to the growing evidence of the importance of spiritual development for young children and their families. And I'm really looking forward to hearing and learning more this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan, for your inspiring words, not only for bringing up this emergency, this urgency, this increase of violence that we are seeing all around the world, but also for bringing us hope that there is also growing evidence that investing in ECD programs is not only cost effective, but it has a sustainable impact. And now I would like to share with all of you a short video that brings upon a little bit of these stories of change that we have been seeing in the different implementations all around the world from the toolkit, and that later on today we will be seeing and hearing more in detail from the Brazil and Pakistan experiences.
Francisco, we cannot hear.
I apologize. Let me try to share once again.
I have personally witnessed the positive impact of this approach within our own communities.
So we have seen the impact from the community based on the testimonies we are getting from the children and also from the parents.
तो इस वजह से मैंने उनके साथ जब ये ट्रेनिंग ली उसके बाद मुझे बहुत फ़र्क आया। मैं अपने बच्चों के साथ फ्रेंडली बातें करना, उनको समझाना, ताकि बच्चे जो है ना मुझे जैसे एक दोस्त की तरह हर बात मेरे साथ शेयर करना शुरू हो गए।
E antes que ela tinha esse entendimento de que para disciplinar o filho, a filha, ela precisava dar uma palmada, ela precisava bater, né? Que esse era o entendimento que ela teve da infância dela, ela passou por isso.
E o projeto veio bem na época em que, né, como eu falei para você, dessa fase dele, e me ajudou muito a me autoconhecer como pessoa, como mãe e a saber lidar também com nas situações em que eu me encontrava de aflito, de atrito ali com ele. Então eles me ajudaram bastante.
Então, ao passar do tempo, eles foram entendendo que precisava quebrar esse círculo, né, da violência.
And most parents in the community say that before being told of this program, of this teaching, for them they saw beating children is a normal thing because they grew up in seeing people are beating children, and also themselves they've been beaten with their parents. So it was not something strange or something made to think that this is a bad thing.
ஃபஸ்ட்டு என் குழந்தை எல்லாரையும் அடிச்சுக்கிட்டு இருந்தான். அது வந்து எனக்கு பெரிய சேலஞ்சாக இருந்துச்சு. இப்போ யாரையும் அடிக்கிறது இல்லை, நல்ல விதமாக பேசுகிறேன், மரியாதையாக பேசுகிறான். அது வந்து எனக்கு ஒரு அம்மாவாக நான் ஹாப்பியாக இருக்கேன்.
Possibilita que, além das pessoas trabalharem a sua mudança, né, pessoal, essa mudança ela repercute na comunidade, ela repercute na família. E eu acho que esse é o maior ganho dessa caixa de ferramentas, porque possibilita essa transformação social.
Through this initiative, we witnessed not only an inner transformation of children, ground on the values of empathy, self-awareness and compassion, but also it's seeds for the broader social change in the communities.
बहुत ज़्यादा बड़ी तब्दीली नज़र आई इस ट्रेनिंग के बाद, क्योंकि इस ट्रेनिंग से पहले हम खुद भी यकीनन इस हवाले से उस कदर जो है वो तवज्जो नहीं दे पा रहे थे कि किस कदर ज़रूरी है कि जब बच्चों पर तशद्दुद होता है, तो जब ये इस ट्रेनिंग के अंदर हमें जिस तफसील के साथ जो चीज़ें हमारे सामने आई, तो उसके बाद जब हमें भी माशरे में जहाँ पे भी लोगों से मुखातब होने का मौका मिला, तो हमने महराब व मिंबर से भी, वैसे भी दुरूस वगैरह में भी, मुख्तलिफ़ स्कूलों वगैरह में, हॉस्टल्स में जहाँ हमें मौका मिला, हमने अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह वहाँ जाकर भी इस हवाले से बहुत ज़्यादा आगाही मुहिम चलाई.
Let us come together and create space for every child where the child's intellectual, emotional and spiritual potential can truly flourish.
Yes, and this was just a small preview of what we'll be hearing along today. But just to explain that all these findings have been initial preliminary findings we have seen in the MEL process we have done during the implementations, and that we will be hearing more about all this in the last part of today's webinar from the experiences from Brazil and Pakistan. So now I would like to introduce the next section, the conversation regarding the influence of faith communities in parenting and child development. And for this, I will be giving the floor to Maria Lucia Uribe, Executive Director of Arigato International Geneva. Maria Lucia, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Francisco, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And it is a privilege for me to open this conversation on a topic that goes to the very heart of what it means to care for children, and which is how we nurture not only their minds and their bodies, but also their spirit, their values, and their sense of connection with others. And as Siobhan said in her introductions, we know that early childhood is a decisive period in which the foundations for life are formed. But very sadly, we also know that too many children still experience violence in the very spaces meant to protect them. And today we are going to be speaking on how faith, science, and also policy can come together to change that reality from the experiences, but also from the reflections of three speakers that we'll have today, that we will speak from different complementary perspectives. So we'll have Mr. James Kearns from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, You will see more. I'm not gonna go through all their bios. You will have them on the chat because there is a lot of experience that they are bringing here. So just their names and the institutions they represent. And James is going to help us understand the importance of faith-sensitive approaches to early childhood, but also the major barriers and opportunities that we are seeing. Then we will have Dr. Selina Pam, who will invite us to look at how theology and faith communities can reimagine parenting through the lenses of dignity and nonviolence, and also the role of spirituality in violence prevention. And then we will have Sabine Rakotomalala, who will reflect on how parenting interventions can intentionally integrate nurturing spiritual qualities to enhance child protection. What we're going to do today is really a dialogue. So I invite you to write your questions and your comments on the chat in the Q&A box. And they will have just a few minutes now in the beginning to give us some introduction, and then we will be able to have a dialogue together. So I invite all your questions, and I would like to invite first James to give some initial thoughts on the thematic, James. Also, because in your work, you look very much at the ecosystem of the child. So where does parenting that is faith sensitive fit into this? The floor is yours, James.
Thank you, Maria Lucia. Greetings, everyone who's on this webinar from around the world. It's a delight to be part of this conversation today. So our center really focuses on what do we know from a vast array of different disciplines of science about how human development happens, particularly in the early years of life. We have been focused recently on the idea that every child grows up in a developmental environment, which simply means that all of the experiences and exposures that a child has in the places they live, grow, play, and learn are directly shaping their health, learning, and development as they grow. And so what this means is we'll hear a lot, and we've talked a lot over the years about the critical importance of the environment of relationships, that kind of social environment around the child, the parents, other actors in the community like faith communities, and how that's shaping not just brain development, but all kinds of systems in the body. We also need to look, though, at the factors in the natural and built environment that surround families and children, whether that's housing or climate or these other things. And there are a set of more systemic realities that also shape those environments where children grow and learn and play, like laws and social norms and so forth. And so I think by taking this kind of broader developmental environment lens, when we talk about where can faith communities and spiritual development kind of be part of the story of how children develop, it gives us an opportunity to see multiple places where both the values of our communities and the infrastructure, the social capacities of our faith communities are interacting with families and with children. And as we've heard in the video and other places, we also know that our religious teachings and leadership in our faith communities over time have had a significant impact on the legal, social, and ethical norms in our societies, sometimes for good and sometimes not for such good, especially when we talk about violence against children. And so I think what this does is it gives us this opportunity to see where within that ecosystem that surrounds the child do we have opportunities to positively influence that development. Two more points as sort of openers here. All development is happening as an interaction of our genetics, the environment, that place where we grow, and timing, when things happen. And this is an iterative, interactive process. And so we can talk about kind of innate character and other kinds of things, but none of that is expressed in any of us without this kind of interaction in our environment. And so there's actually a lot of alignment about what biology and neuroscience are telling us and the values in our faith communities. I remember many years ago being at a meeting and sitting next to somebody from the Center of Disease Control in the US at lunch, and somehow we got onto the fact that we were both members of faith communities. And she said to me, and I remembered this, that if you read St. Paul's Fruits of the Spirit, and you look at what we talk about as sort of executive function and self-regulation skills in children, and if you look at the characteristics that are described in the toolkit, they all resonate with each other. We use slightly different language, but that there is this sense of what does a well-developed, well-regulated person, what are they able to do? What are the characteristics of that? And so I think there's this space where we might use different words, we might have slightly different language, but we're talking about often a lot of similar principles. And so biology is describing the causal mechanisms of how things happen in development and giving us understanding of how we are shaped. Environments, which include culture, social interactions, faith, and values, that environment is what does the shaping. And so I think that's the critical thing, and where we can start to understand where spiritual development and those who are in our communities and working with families are contributing to and part of that overall developmental process in the environments where children are growing. So Maria Lucia, I will leave it there as an opener and look forward to the panel conversation as we move forward. Thank you.
Excellent. James, I think you have really give us a framework here, particularly looking at the ecosystem, the environment, and giving us a framework to understand how these experiences and the environment shape the child and all the other components. So I think we will be referring to this. And you also mentioned the role that faith plays in all this, and we know that 84% of the world, the population, adhere to any particular religious or spiritual belief. So we're talking about a critical influence in the lives of children and communities and families. So I'm gonna turn now to Selina, to Dr. Selina Pham. And Dr. Selina is the chair of the Faith and Violence Against Children Working Group, Sexual Violence Research Initiative, Faith and Gender Community of Practice. And you will see her bio on the chat. And Selina, I mean, your work has been at the intersection between faith, violence against children, and child rights. So where do you see this role of faith communities and the role of the spiritual development of children in this intersection between protection of children, the role of faith communities, and this more protective approach to the spiritual development? The floor is yours, Selina.
Thank you. Big question. So I'll maybe kick off and just hello everyone. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I work as a Christian theologian and faith leader, as well as a sort of violence and faith practitioner. So exploring, like you said, that complex intersection. And I come with a feminist liberational lens, and you know, therefore I have very interesting conversations with a very diverse group of people. And I want to highlight two things, picking up on what James was saying. One, within that wider ecosystem, we know from research that faith plays a cross-cutting role. It plays a role in the life of children, a role in the life of families, particularly parents, but also in the community and in that wider socio-political order of what is seen as normal and natural, and what is seen as right and what is seen as wrong. And therefore, there's huge potential. There's huge what we might call spiritual capital that we can bring to bear on all of those different layers of life. And one of the things I've learned in the research that I've done as a practitioner working with parents is that sometimes we can tend to go in with the negative. We want to end violence. We want to, we know the verses about spare the rod, spoil the child, or about children being seen and not heard. These are almost proverbs that have fallen into our religious and cultural frameworks. And we kind of go in with those. And the challenge with that is it means that those communities become very defensive. They feel that their tradition or their religion is being attacked, and it becomes a starting point that can often be really unhelpful. So one of the things we've seen working in conversations with faith communities is this framing of the care of children as a spiritual task, you know, and and finding ways in to many of the themes that we see across not only Christianity, but many other religions that enable us to draw on the child as an important person within our faiths, to draw on wider themes such as dignity and justice and equality, that faith leaders are comfortable with, that they understand, but then to make connections. And I like what James said about we might be speaking in different languages, but actually at the heart, maybe we're talking about some of the same things. So that connection, like between the fruits of the spirit and self-regulation, we have to learn how to talk to one another. And it's important that we begin by finding commonalities. How do we think about dignity and justice and equality in relation to children? What does that look like? What are the changes that we need to make? And I think the important thing about a positive framing is we have to go in believing that both religion and culture are designed to be life-giving forces in human life. And that can be hard when we've been harmed by culture or religion. And it can be hard when we've seen the harm which these have done in children's lives, for us to not go in and want to change them or want to dismiss them. But I think it's really important that we start with this principle, this commonality, where we say we want our cultures and religion to bring life particularly to the most vulnerable amongst us, and to attach those notions of care for the most vulnerable, which we find in so many traditions, and actually help people to understand the ways in which children are vulnerable. I think one of the other things we see, one of the things I see as being helpful is finding alternative stories and narratives, stories where children are centered, stories, and I love these stories where you look at, for example, in the Christian tradition, how does Jesus interact with children? Like, how do we bring those stories out? Stories where the Prophet Muhammad interacts in different kinds of ways. Like, what are our founding stories? What are the stories of our founders, whether as them as children or how they treated children? And then we offer alternatives, positive alternatives for people to rethink. One of the things we know in religious traditions is people are very attached to their tradition. They feel it's important that we're faithful and to that tradition. And it can mean that and this is particularly true in relation to children, that we must pass on something. And we often pass on what we experienced. And this can be the challenge with disrupting that cycle of harm. Religion and culture are also about intergenerational transmission. And one of the big things I found powerful when I'm working with organizations such as Mothers Union that focus on what does it mean to be good mothers, is to help people to move forwards from what they experienced. So they have experienced something that was harmful, and they then continue to pass that on. And I find that we have to do a lot of work with people of faith and faith leaders, not only them, but to help them think about their own inner child. What did they experience? And instead of saying your parents were wrong, your parents were bad, your grandmother was awful, because we are very defensive of the people in our lives who we loved, we're able to say, we know more now. And when we do that, we connect to the spirit of all of our best spiritual and religious traditions that says we want to give life, we want to be part of a nurturing life for everyone, particularly the most vulnerable. And there are things that we know now, and this is where the conversation with other disciplines is important, such as public health and child rights, where we say we need to learn that some of the things that maybe happened to us were the best that could be done back then, but we know more now. And we help accompany, and this was one of the strategies that came up in the Arigato toolkit around accompanying parents. If we go in with more shame, with more beating parents over the head, with you're getting it wrong, we know that violence becomes a coping strategy for parents who are struggling to cope. And it's really important that we offer alternatives. But when we're working with faith communities, we need to offer alternatives not only in the sort of secular language of child rights and participation, we need to be able to translate that into language which they can understand. What does it mean for children to be liberated, to be safe, to be seen and heard? And sometimes we can trace this back. I live in South Africa, where very harmful theologies were used to justify slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. And one of the things I will do is I'll talk about that. I'll say, people in South Africa had to reimagine their theologies. And they did that by finding other texts, other rituals, and they used their faith to counter injustice rather than perpetuate it. And when I talk about that and say, corporal punishment comes in from colonialism, we beat our slaves, we beat those who are less than us because we're trying to control them. We start to open up the conversation and say, well, what would it be like if instead of trying to control and punish our children, we explored ways to connect and have compassion on them? But behind this, and I'm just going to say this briefly, then I'm going to stop, we have to tackle our punitive images of the divine. in all of our traditions, especially in Christian tradition, there are violent images of God. There are images of God as punitive parent, as violent father. And we have to be willing to work alongside theologians to challenge those images and to bring forwards alternative images. Images of God as the mother hen, images of Allah as nurturer. These different ways to actually reimagine, because if we think that God is a punitive parent who's hitting us when we do bad things, then it's likely in our family structures, and we often see family as sacred or family as a spiritual task, we're going to model that same pattern. And I think this is where we have to be quite disruptive. Yes, a positive framing, but we also have to be willing to say some of our ideas of God need to be fundamentally rethought, because if that's our image of God, then we're going to model that in the way in which we behave in our households. And this is where we need to work with theologians, but we can't start there. If we start there, people are going to get defensive and they're going to leave the conversation. So I think we need to find points of commonality, and then we need religious literacy to do that, not just a group of theologians over here. We all need to find ways to read our scriptures, our sacred texts, our rituals, and to find those alternative stories, to find the stories where children are present or are history makers or are spiritual agents, but also to find the difficult stories where children are silenced, and to say, how can we read this story in a way that we give the voice back to the child? So I am going to stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Selina. Very good points. The language that brings together faith and science, I think that is the struggle we have had over the years in this consortium. And the purpose of this consortium was to try this language. And as you said, there are many secular approaches on how to do positive parenting and all this. But we know the positive and at the same time negative influence that religious communities can have. And if we speak their language, it's much easier to work with them to influence parents and caregivers in positive ways. So these are very important aspects, the child at the center and the theologies and reimagining theologies. Very important points. And with the language, I'm going to pass now to Sabine Rakotomalala. And Sabine is the Senior Technical Advisor of the World Health Organization. And Sabine has been a member of the consortium and is in this capacity that she's also joining us today. And Sabine, I think one critical aspect of this talking about how this faith-sensitive parenting is seen also in secular world. How do we make these approaches more able to be uptaken by organizations that work on positive parenting and child upbringing, child development? So how we make it better recognized within public health, violence prevention approaches in early childhood, policies, science-aligned strategies for the protection of children. So your views on this, Sabine, to start us with, and then we continue with the dialogue.
Thanks, Maria Lucia. Really appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm just going to quickly build on two things that Selina said, which for me are so essential. The first one is the language that we use. And I'm coming at this from a public health and evidence-based perspective. So I'm actually trying to get rid of the language and say, okay, and Maria Lucia in the beginning said something like 83% of the world's population has a faith. And sometimes these statistics are just very useful. Like, this is not about your opinion, this is about some facts. So regardless of the language we're speaking, I think it's often important to focus on facts. The second point, Selina, that you mentioned, which also really resonates with me, is that we're not talking about the bad, but we're actually talking about the good. And let me just explain it in 2 words. I've been working in the violence prevention field for many years, over 25 years. We know that 1 out of 2 children in the world suffers from violence. That's physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence, online violence. That's 1 out of 2 people on this webinar, 1 out of 2 kids in a school bus, 1 out of 2 kids on a football team. It's huge. And yet, when we try to support parents and when we try to put interventions in place for violence prevention, we're always talking about laws and changing norms and very protection measures. And sometimes I think we should be filling the vacuum and not only saying everything that shouldn't happen. We shouldn't smack our children. We shouldn't leave our girls unattended. No, but what should we be doing? And like any learning, when you can say what we should be doing, that's when we see progress. So sorry, that was just a very quick introduction, but I just want to answer your question, Maria Lucia, with 3 different components. The first one is the evidence that exists. The second one is some definitions. And then the third one is what can we do? I just want to highlight some of the incredible evidence that's out there. For example, primary prevention, we know that today individuals that have demonstrated any type of spirituality or religion have seen reductions in the likelihood of physical and sexual aggression. That's evidence. So the more spiritual or religious you are, the less likely you are to perpetrate violence. Then if we look at secondary prevention, we know that spirituality plays a crucial role in fostering resilience. So that means that somebody that's been exposed to violence can recover more quickly when they need to start moving on with their life. And then as a tertiary prevention, we see that engagement in religious communities and, for example, volunteerism has been associated with improved purpose and healing. So there's hundreds of randomized controlled trials of studies that show this really great correlation between spirituality and religion and health outcomes, violence perpetration, violence recovery outcomes. So that's just a little bit on the evidence. The second one is the definition, because my thinking was, of course, but which part of spirituality? What does that even mean? So I went into the science again, which is what I do every time I'm confused. And basically the science breaks it down quite simply. And first I was looking at the toolkit, but then as I was going through the data, I see that social emotional skills programs, psychosocial programs have really strong evidence to show that 5 key, I want to call them competencies, but maybe they're values or morals, or call them whatever you like. These 5 really help to resolve conflict and not resort to violence. The first one, and I think James was saying it in the beginning, self-awareness. Second one is self-management. Third one is social awareness. Fourth one is responsible decision-making. And fifth one is relationship skills. So these are 5 core components of religion or spirituality or psychosocial programs or social emotional programs, whatever you want to call them, that are essential for children to learn. So there we have it. We have evidence, something works. Then we try to break it down. We see these 5 components. Now, to answer your question, Maria Lucia, sorry, it was a long way to get there. How do we do it? Again, I dive into the evidence. There's 2 great ways to do it. One is through schools, and schools can also be faith-based schools, use these vectors to help inculcate those 5 key components. And the other one is through parent and caregiver support. So making sure that parents feel listened to, that parents themselves understand these 5 components so that they can then model them and transmit them to their children. I'll stop here, Maria Lucia, back to you.
Thank you, Sabine, bringing us to the evidence, because I think that is what we have been seeing when we talk about this. Is like, what is the evidence and what is the spiritual development? What is the spirituality, and why do you talk about spirituality and not about social, emotional well-being? Aren't they the same? Or when we talk about the spirituality, people say we are talking about religion, and therefore we are trying to impose religion to children. So there are several issues and barriers that I think we face, and that we have seen during all these 4 or 5 years we have been working on this in the consortium. So I want to move to James, talking about these barriers. James, we talk about the evidence. The evidence is there, and Sabine also. And I also should say that there is evidence, but I think we don't have enough evidence. I think we need more. But James, in terms of those barriers, institutional, political, cultures that keep faith-sensitive approaches from being embedded in national child protection and development frameworks, what are those barriers, and then how to go about it, and what opportunities actually exist?
Thank you, and I really appreciate Selena and Sabine, the approaches and additional sort of perspectives and content you've put into the room, the virtual room here. So looking forward how we sort of collectively tackle this. I think there have been two fundamental challenges from my perspective. One is in more of the kind of science and public health and areas, this discomfort and uncertainty about how do we empirically measure faith and belief and spirituality. I think we're getting better at naming and being able to measure in quantitative ways how certain kinds of practices shape health and well-being in different kinds of ways. But that idea of discomfort, it's a different realm of knowing in some way. And it's what it's trying to understand in terms of causal mechanisms and outcomes. So there's that discomfort. I think we are getting better at generating real evidence about how certain kinds of practices without. I think the second caution is not wanting to endorse or seem like you are aligned with any particular religious institution and set of beliefs, right? The doctrine and theology piece. And so I think then one of the really important ways, and this is where the work of Arigato, for those of you who read my bio, I used to be part of Religions for Peace for many years before I joined the Harvard Center. How do we create this space that is interreligious? And therefore, we are talking about public language about values and care and social engagement and the way that faith communities are part of that developmental environment, which I think creates better spaces for this kind of conversation where we can acknowledge the fact that there are these underlying principles, competencies, skills, capacities that we all might put different labels on, but there's a space that is shared that we can talk about and find ways to work together that don't require those who aren't coming from a faith perspective to feel like they have to be aligned with a particular doctrinal set of beliefs and values.
Thank you, James. I think this is a very, very important, this discomfort and in trying to measure something that people maybe do not see as maybe factual or something that can actually be measured. And I think these efforts are important. I'm gonna move to Selena and I want to unpack a little bit, Selena, this concept of spiritual development. And Sabine talked about some spiritual capacities and those that the evidence shows that actually have a contribution to well-being and protection. So one of the aspects of this toolkit is making this connection between the spiritual development and the protection of children from violence. So how do you see this connection, talking from this evidence perspective, from your experiences also working with faith communities? And so if you can maybe give us a little bit of that linkage for the audience to see how these two things actually come together, and perhaps also building on what Sabine and James have shared.
Sure, and sorry, I lost signal for a little bit, but I'm back now. So I may have missed a little bit of what was said. In the work that I do, and I run a course on faith and helping children thrive without violence. So as Sabine was saying, that emphasis on what should we do, not just what shouldn't we do. One of the things that really comes up when we discuss spiritual development and we look at the toolkit is the sort of radical social shift in faith leaders' minds when they think about the idea that children inherently, in a sense, have a connection to God, that they're not sort of in some kind of hierarchy where they're at the bottom in terms of social and spiritual status. But as you were saying earlier, this idea of centering children. And, this is where I think understanding the spiritual development of children for their own sake, but also for the sake of those around them and the way in which they're treated. The idea that children have a direct relationship with the divine, that can be developed and nurtured and accompanied, and faith leaders' job isn't sort of this sort of top-down model of telling children what to do and requiring unquestioning obedience and submission. Obviously, we've seen this with women as well. Offers this really radical subversion once we see children as having a spirituality and those around them as accompanying them and assisting them and giving them agency to develop that and to take it where it goes. This starts to rethink how we see a child and this notion of children being seen and heard in our faith spaces, of being participants in our rituals, of being voices within our sacred stories, of having a voice, then becomes again like part of the spiritual task. Sometimes when we're talking to faith leaders, they say, well, but our tasks are spiritual. And kind of what they mean by that is they're not anything else. We don't have responsibility for the physical stuff or the other stuff. Our job is spiritual. And the thing about seeing children as spiritual actors is it then provides a way for faith actors and faith leaders to sort of make that connection and to think again in terms of what should I do to actually nurture that. And that's where the toolkit is an amazing resource. And we know that violence often emerges once we see somebody as inferior to us. And we also know that in lots of systems throughout the world, particularly hierarchical, patriarchal, religious systems, and that's not to say that religions are inherently patriarchal, but the systems around them often are, children often end up at the bottom, and that increases their risk of different kinds of violence enormously. So when we're able to shift the status of the child, when we're able to show how people like Muhammad and Jesus and the Buddha treat children in a particular way and lift them up rather than push them down, this offers us a model for an idea of child-friendly faith spaces as part of what it means for us to be a faith community. And I think this centralizing is incredibly important. And we know that by doing that, by changing the social status of the child in our faith community, but also in families, we can think of a family as a little dictatorship, with a sort of, a displaced aggression cycle. The man hits the woman hits the child hits the dog, this sort of hierarchy. Or we can speak about other models, the democracy of the Holy Spirit, the ways in which we can say our family is sacred because we all listen to one another and everybody has a voice. And we know that when we create these sorts of social structures, children are able to thrive. And we know that once children are seen and heard and feel able to speak up and to connect, the risks of violence indirectly are lowered, and there's a lot of evidence around that. But what I'm interested in is this notion of spiritual development in the course that I teach. Religious leaders really connect to it, and once they're able to go back into their communities and see children and offer children spaces, this then begins to transform how children are perceived. And I think this is really, really valuable. And it enables us to do lots of religious things differently. Who's the person who prays? Who is the person who shares a story from the Bible? Whose voices are considered, whose voices are not? And therefore, it's quite a subversive idea. And it challenges that hierarchy which we've inherited. Right? Of children shouldn't be seen and heard. Children must be respectful. Children must be silenced. Children must be obedient. And we think, well, this is what our religion means. And it offers us this alternative. So for me, and as I was saying before, the positive framing, spiritual development becomes this hook that religious leaders are like, wow, like I'm interested in that. Tell me more. Whereas if you hand them a sort of handbook on how not to be violent, they tend to sort of, they tend to back off a bit. So I do think it's one of those bridges where we can make connections. And once we see that connection happen, I think magic can really happen when children are given that space. And when children themselves know that space is open to them, when they trust their own instincts and their own connection to God. And we see that where children are able to stand up when they feel like things are wrong because they have a sense of their own spirituality. And that can be incredibly powerful.
Thank you, Selina. I'm aware of time because we have the other speakers and a presentation, but I want to turn to Sabine and then to all of you for your final recommendations and thoughts of what we have discussed. But Sabine, first, Selina is giving us some clues on the importance of spirituality, particularly when it is presented to faith communities, but how within parenting programs that perhaps are secular, how we can intentionally integrate spiritual development, not as a religious aspect, but as an intrinsic part of child development.
Thanks. I just want to say also that I completely agree with James's point on the importance of using other terminology, whatever makes sense, and on Selina's points on the social status of children. They're such important points. I don't know if any of you have read the book Purple Hibiscus. If you haven't, I really suggest you read it. It's a very powerful book about the role of religion and spirituality and so on. But basically, I think, Maria Lucia, the way I see it is that we cannot leave things up to interpretation. I think we have to be much more, of course, all our biblical or all our religious stories are up for interpretation. And I think with this, we have to be so careful. We have to be much more intentional and say, these are the things that we're collectively trying to bring across. And parenting programs is the best way to do that because they are positive. They don't say you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this. In 8 to 10 sessions, you can see 50% of decrease of violence in the households. So you're helping parents just for their own mental and emotional well-being. And then they are then able to pass on these positive values and positive behaviors to their children. And no better place to do that than through the faith-based communities, which means on a Sunday school, which means in a Quranic education, which means in a temple, anywhere. But we have to be very intentional with what it is that we're trying to pass on, because we can't leave it up to interpretation, where one person will say, oh, but smacking a kid might be good for the child. No, we're talking about these positive things, which are the self-regulation, the self-management, the self-awareness, the empathy, the respect. And so I think we need to, as a field, all be more intentional in terms of those parenting support groups through faith-based communities.
Very good points, Sabine. And this reminds me of a story. Once we did a workshop in Kenya, and then we came to talk about spirituality and prevention of violence. And then some religious leaders stood up and said, we are seeing a lot of problems with young people and adolescents, and we want to reintroduce corporal punishment in schools. And of course, this was very hard for all of us trying to talk about these topics and how faith communities can actually be a positive influence to parenting and education and so on. And at the end of this workshop, we did what Selina was speaking about, kind of reimagining theologies and understanding what are theologies that affirm human dignity. And they themselves, the religious leaders, talk about that and challenge themselves. And at the end, they said, which goes to the point of what are the alternatives that I think James also mentioned, came and said, we understand the impact that this has on children, can have in children, but what are the alternatives? What can we do differently to promote a different way of parenting or a different way to deal with children or, misbehaviors? And they said, we don't know. And I think that's where we need to be more, where you are saying, Sabine, on don't let it for speculation, but we need to be clear on what we are talking about when it means to what it means to nurture spirituality in children and how this can be done in practical ways. So I'm gonna move to James for final thoughts, then Selina and Sabine.
Great. So here's a final thought. As important and as absolutely central to human development and child development that parenting does not happen in a vacuum. When we look, and the idea of this developmental environment gives us the opportunity to understand that the adult caregivers in children's lives are also being shaped by that environment. And so what's happening in the broader environment is affecting the children directly. If you take things like heat or any of these things, there are direct biological impacts on the child. That environment is also affecting the parents. And what it's doing is it's either enhancing or restricting the parents' capacity to be nurturing caregivers. And so I think we need to think about what's happening in the caregiving environment and how can our faith communities be supportive of that environment. So it's not just leaving it to the parents and training parents, because those parents are acting and being shaped by their environments as well, and how that helps or hinders their ability to be good parents. And I think our faith communities offer wonderful multi-generational spaces and capacities to take on part of that ecosystem of supporting good caregiving. So I think there's a really important that too often we end up focusing and putting all the burden just on the parents. And we can see, and the science tells us it's not just the parents, it's that broader environment.
Excellent point, James. Thank you. Selina?
So interestingly, I feel like I'm saying the same thing as James, but while he's looking at like spatial awareness, it's not just the parents, it's the wider ecosystem. I want to make a mention of the sort of journey through time. So we were all children once. And I think we tend to almost think of parents as a fixed category and then children as another fixed category. But, so many adults are wounded children, and we pass on what we experience. And, we know this this intergenerational cycle of harm, trauma that is not transformed is transmitted. And I think in the work that I've done, what's been truly transformational is where we've been able to help people connect with the harm or the hurt that maybe they have experienced. And instead of choosing to pass that on or passing it on without really making a choice, they choose to say, I want to do something different for my child. And, I think that inner journey, that ability to kind of recognize that maybe I was a child that wasn't supported or helped, or some of the practices that I experienced that I normalized to make sense of it aren't practices that I want to pass on without demonizing who has come before me, is a really, really important feature. We find that this sort of working around breaking the cycle, which sort of says it's not that you can only sit in your sort of group as a parent and then it's parents versus children. We actually say connect to your life cycle journey. What were the moments in it where somebody came alongside you and helped you and supported you and helped you thrive, and what were the moments where maybe they didn't? And we find that when you're able to do that, psychological journey in a way, as well as the journey around belief, and to hold those two things together, that also really changes the energy in the room. And then finally, just to say another big thing in my course, when people come in and they're often a bit defensive, they'll say, oh, you're going to try and tell me the facts or the evidence, about how I'm not allowed to hit my child, and they can feel quite defensive. We play a lot of stories of the impact on adult survivors, like people who are willing to talk about the impact of that in their lives. And we find that this sort of space for storytelling and asking questions becomes an important way in for people to sort of say, oh, I didn't realize. So I think the modalities we use, storytelling, retelling your own story, and being able to hear the stories of others becomes a way. We know that faith leaders can be incredibly important in parenting spaces and in encouraging the parents that they know to go and attend the trainings. But there's often a gap where faith leaders sort of go, yeah, well, you can go off and do that thing if you want, but there's a gap. They're just suspicious of it. So when we're able to bridge that gap and have them go, yeah, absolutely do this, it's going to be really important. I think then we really get that critical mass. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah. Thank you, Selina. Sabine?
There's some comments in the chat. Sorry, just to say there's quite a few comments in the chat about this sort of intergenerational cycle of violence. Parents are not born cruel and children are not born bad. And if we can start to reshape those, we offer something else.
Exactly. And then, because we don't have much time, we have Sabine, but feel free, you as speakers, also to interact in the chat. There are maybe a few questions in there, and so that we can expand the conversation as well. Sabine?
Yeah, I'll keep it very short. I would say two things. I think we need to be intentional and very clear. And let's try keep doing that. And secondly, let's not give up the battle. Sometimes it's hard and it's complicated. I put a paper in the chat. It was refused 5 times. And the 6th time, after changing it and rechanging it, I just feel that we need to keep trying to convey the message in very clear ways. And sometimes it's through storytelling, as Selina is saying. Sometimes it's through evidence. Sometimes it's through posters. Sometimes it's through radio shows. So let's keep fighting and let's keep being very intentional and clear in what we're saying.
Great. Thank you so much, James, Selina, and Sabine, for this discussion. I think we could have had a couple of hours or more to continue this dialogue, but it's a good way of framing the discussions and creating some reflections for our audience today. And I think that a lot of what you have said resonates to the work that people are doing in their communities, and I see in the chats. And it gives us a good transition to Francisco, who's going to share a little bit more about the toolkit, and then the experiences from Brazil and Pakistan implementing the toolkit. So this toolkit that we have been talking about is a toolkit that was developed by the Consortium Nurturing Values and Spirituality in Early Childhood, which is a consortium of 18 plus organizations. And the toolkit was developed in a period of almost 5 years, where we came together to try to understand why spiritual development of children matters and why it is part of the holistic development of children. So we came together and we launched this toolkit in 2018. And it was really the effort, several organizations and trying to bring faith and religion together. We did pilots, we had conversations, and then we developed this very comprehensive toolkit that is being implemented in many places, and that we will not share all the details, but Francisco is going to try to summarize what are the important components of the toolkit and how it's being used, and then you will hear from the experiences from Nelson in Brazil, and then in Pakistan as well. Thank you. From Shanaz in Pakistan, sorry. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria Lucia. I will be sharing my screen. Okay. Okay. So, as Maria Lucia was explaining, a few years ago, the Consortium on Nurturing Values and Spirituality in Early Childhood for the Prevention of Violence make themselves a question. How can we bridge the gap and bring the language of faith and science closer? How can we advocate and showcase for the integration of spiritual development aspects into early childhood frameworks and programming? And that's how, after several years of working, they came upon this model of intervention, this program that materialized in this toolkit. And so what the toolkits try to showcase or advocate is that nurturing spiritual development in early childhood can bring critical contributions to the protection from violence and promotion of holistic well-being. The toolkit aims to work with organizations, with faith actors, religious and spiritual communities to actively engage in the protection of children from violence by supporting the parents, caregivers, educators, and the communities to nurture children's spiritual development and take an active role in addressing violence in early childhood. But why faith actors? Besides this key factor that James brought up, that many laws and norms in our societies are built upon religious traditions, it's also because they are important influences with high levels of legitimacy in their communities all around the world, because they are very well positioned to examine and address practices that not only condone violence against children, but also to strengthen and promote those that uphold child's dignity, because they can advocate for policy changes and because they can also foster early childhood development programs in their own communities. But what is this about holistic child development? Well, for us, it's a central part of the full, sound, and holistic development of the children, because it closely connects to the other developmental domains. When children become more self-aware, they are more able to connect with others. And when they understand that interconnectedness, they learn to develop ethical and positive relationships with others. It also enhances children's self-regulation and management of emotions, as Sabine brought up. And this in turn serves as the foundation of enriched executive function skills. So it's a two-way supporting role. Spiritual development supports the social, emotional, the cognitive, and the physical development, as well as those aspects also support and strengthen the spiritual development of children. And what is spirituality? We are not trying here to give a concept of spirituality, and we are not linking it with religious traditions or practices, but actually it's what enables the gradual and progressive unfolding of children's innate ability to connect with themselves, with the others, with nature, and with God, the divine, the transcendent, or the ultimate reality. All that as they join the search for a sense of belonging, rooting in their own communities, in their own traditions, but also looking for that transcendence, that transcendence that only purpose and meaning brings upon. In order to nurture the spiritual development of children, this model, this program, brings upon three premises. So one is that the people engaging with children, the adults, the parents, caregivers, educators, that they understand about child rights, they understand about violence against children and its consequences, but also that they understand the importance of children's spiritual development and how it contributes to the protection of violence. It also, the second premise is something Selena brought up, that we often pass out what we experience, right? So the premise is that in order that adults can support children to nurture their own spirituality, firstly, they need to nurture their own spirituality. So the adult needs to nurture first its spirituality so that they later on can support the children. And the last premise is that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And children's spiritual development needs that positive relationships between the adults and the children are fostered and nurtured. They need a safe, respectful, and violence-free environment in order for them to be able to nurture their spirituality, but also to be allowed to have empowering experiences that allows them to internalize ethical values, to develop their agency, their sense of community, their belonging, and their purpose, ultimately encouraging them to safely pursue and nourish their spirituality. These three steps, in turn, are not only conditions, but actually work as preventive factors against violence. These three areas are also not only the prerequisites, but they are interrelated and together form the basis for a sound foundation for children's spiritual development. And how does it contribute to the protection of violence? Well, by challenging and changing social and cultural norms that condone the use of violence, by creating safe, respectful, violence-free, and loving environments for children, by reducing harsh parenting practices and creating positive parenting-child relationships, and by strengthening life skills by prioritizing social emotional learning and the development of pro-social behaviors. All this connects to the 7 strategies for ending violence against children from Inspire. So the toolkit, this program, this model of intervention is actually directly contributing to 4 of these 7 strategies. This process also of nurturing spiritual development doesn't work as an island. They need also other positive inputs, such as responsive caregiving, health, education, nutrition, child protection. So it's not that working on this and nurturing the spiritual development of children is only enough, but this contributes to these strategies and it contributes to the protection of children against violence. Some of the benefits that we have seen in nurturing the spirituality of children, well, mainly, first of all, improved mental health and psychosocial security. By nurturing the children's spiritual development, it works as a protective mechanism against violence. It fosters resilience in children affected by adversity, and it promotes healing for those affected by violence and abuse. So we have seen in some studies that there is less risk of aggressive behavior, there is less risk of depression, there is fewer high-risk behaviors, and also less risk of substance abuse. And why the importance of working also with adults, with the parents, not only because of what was brought up about trying to break the cycle of violence, but also because research has shown that if after 2 generations of people that have nurtured their spirituality, we have even seen an 80% decrease or less chances of facing depression. So that's why it's also important to work generation through generation. Other benefits we have seen: improved social-emotional well-being. It also promotes and strengthens the development of ethical values and pro-social behaviors. As I said earlier, also it strengthens resilience by helping children find meaning in life, reframe narratives of loss, to connect to their communities. And something very important about this also that links of the intergenerational work is that when a critical mass promotes these values such as respect, empathy, compassion, nurturing parenting, then it has the power to become a tipping point for societal transformation. And also because when the children that we are trying to nurture their spirituality now grow up, then they will be able to raise their children, their next generation, the same way. So it's also a way in trying to break this cycle of violence and not trying to repeat ourselves with our children. So this was a very brief overview of the toolkit, but just wanted to highlight that this has been implemented worldwide. And now that we will be listening directly from the experiences of Brazil by Dr. Nelson Arns Newman from Pastoral da Criança International and by Ms. Yasnas Kausar, Childcare Coordinator from the Orphan Sponsorship Program from Islamic Relief Pakistan. So now I will stop sharing and I will give you, Nelson, the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I will speak in Portuguese, so you will have to turn your language, and there will be some kind of delay. Da experiência brasileira com o nosso toolkit, a gente houve diferentes formas de participação. No Brasil e no Paquistão, houve um envolvimento direto dos pais no trabalho comunitário. Digamos, essa capacitação, esse trabalho com os grupos nas comunidades foram bastante interessantes, mas também trouxeram desafios. Encontrar locais adequados para os encontros, lidar com as distâncias, tempo escasso das famílias em situação de vulnerabilidade e a própria instabilidade dos pobres em relação à moradia, ao trabalho, aos núcleos de apoio familiar, e mostraram como a pobreza reforça as barreiras à participação contínua nos nossos encontros. Mas percebemos muitas melhorias, né? Os pais relataram melhorias na sua autorregulação e na gestão emocional, nas suas práticas de comunicação, na presença e vínculo afetivo com os filhos e também em suas práticas disciplinares, que se mostraram menos violentas e mais orientadas ao diálogo. O mais importante que a gente percebeu que esses grupos, esses encontros dos pais juntos na sua própria comunidade, se tornaram espaços seguros de expressão e acolhimento. Lá os pais puderam falar das suas histórias, das suas angústias, das suas dúvidas, né? E até comportamentos que eles mesmos reconheciam como inadequados ou violentos, mas que não tinham alternativas, como foi muito falado pelos expositores antes de mim. E o principal, como você estava no ambiente, digamos, das pessoas para construir com o fundo de espiritualidade das diversas religiões presentes, não tinham medo de julgamento, ou especialmente de serem denunciados às autoridades públicas. Aqui no Brasil, nós temos muitas leis que, em geral, punem os pais, os professores, os médicos, dentro do condomínio de prédios, por exemplo, se o síndico não denuncia um tipo de violência, ele pode ser preso. Com isso, as mães, os pais ficam com muito medo de falar, porque isso pode causar, inclusive, a perda do poder familiar, a retirada das suas crianças. E o que a gente percebeu? Que refletir sobre as suas próprias histórias, reconhecer que eles haviam sido criados em ambientes violentos, foi um passo muito importante para perceberem que é possível fazer diferente com seus próprios filhos. Isso que eu estou falando para vocês não foi uma realidade abstrata. Uma das famílias participantes, por exemplo, foi denunciada pelos vizinhos, e se percebemos isso logo nos primeiros encontros da experiência desse toolkit, e a criança foi retirada da família e colocada num abrigo. Ficou muito evidente que se a gente tivesse chegado mais cedo, tivesse proposto isso antes, ou oferecido esse poder restaurativo, permitindo à família mudar suas práticas e a comunidade referendar essa transformação perante as autoridades, atuando como rede protetiva e não punitiva, isso não teria acontecido, né? Porque o depoimento das famílias dizendo sim, havia esse problema de violência, essa família estava dentro do nosso grupo e nós, como comunidades, vamos ajudar essa família a superar os seus problemas. Agora, o que eu achei muito interessante nessa proposta é que ela é compatível com aquilo que o UNICEF está propondo da mudança de comportamento social, né? O que a gente viu? Que as mudanças sociais duradouras não acontecem pela imposição ou pelo medo, mas pela construção de novos significados dentro de redes de confiança. Nessa perspectiva, óbvio que a mudança individual é necessária, mas não é suficiente. Porque o que sustenta a transformação é o ambiente social, o modo como a comunidade reage, apoia e define o que é aceitável e o que não é aceitável. Essa transformação de comportamentos exige mais do que mensagens educativas. Requer ambientes sociais e espirituais que acolham, apoiem e inspirem. As comunidades de fé têm um papel singular nesse processo, porque oferecem sentido, pertencimento e moral compartilhada, que são 3 condições essenciais para mudar as normas sociais. E as religiões têm um papel único nesse processo, porque elas reúnem pessoas em torno de valores compartilhados, criam redes de confiança e possuem uma profunda capacidade de mobilização moral e emocional. Quando líderes e comunidades de fé se comprometem com a proteção à infância, reconstruindo vínculos e apoiando as famílias frágeis, eles mudam a norma social, transformam o que era antes tolerado em algo inaceitável. Mais do que atribuir culpa à família, trata-se de reconstruir os vínculos, apoiar os frágeis, restaurar o tecido comunitário. A nossa fé não deve inspirar só arrependimento, não. Ela deve construir com toda a comunidade caminhos concretos de reconciliação e de reconstrução, promovendo um ambiente em que a violência nunca seja vista como expressão de amor ou correção, mas como algo incompatível com a dignidade humana e espiritual da criança. Quando uma comunidade religiosa se compromete a apoiar as famílias frágeis, reconstruir os vínculos e apoiar o valor da não violência, ela se torna um verdadeiro agente de transformação social, capaz de sustentar mudanças que nem a lei, nem as políticas públicas isoladamente conseguem reproduzir. Eu vou tomar agora a liberdade de compartilhar com vocês, que eu achei bastante importante, não só a minha visão ou o que a gente está falando, mas concretamente, né, o que aconteceu nessa experiência, nessa avaliação que fizemos juntos com a Universidade de Notre Dame em relação ao toolkit. Então, ele foi feito em regiões bastante diferentes do Brasil. Cuiabá fica dentro do bioma amazônico, né? Guaratuba e Florianópolis, cidades do litoral, essas 2 são capitais, e Campo Largo e Guaratuba, 2 pequenos municípios, em que isso foi bastante interessante, porque o ambiente era bastante diferente. E o que foi visto, né, durante essa avaliação com a Universidade de Notre Dame? Que os participantes passaram a compreender que muitos aspectos do dia a dia, que eles não associavam à espiritualidade, faziam parte da espiritualidade. Havia meio que uma dicotomia. Não, a minha fé, a minha oração, a minha presença em atos religiosos e o meu dia a dia. E começaram a perceber que isso precisa e deve influenciar o dia a dia. Perceberam que ter uma boa comunicação, em vez de gritar ou bater, cuidar para ter espaços seguros, valorizar os relacionamentos, brincar, conexão com a natureza, dar bom exemplo, cultivar uma boa relação com as crianças, estimular tradições familiares, eram todos componentes da espiritualidade. Uma das facilitadoras, olha, não era só os pais, não sabia que a espiritualidade era, por exemplo, abraçar, dar afeto carinhoso para o filho, ou até falar mesmo sobre a morte, as dificuldades que são tão presentes nas comunidades mais vulneráveis, nas favelas brasileiras. Todos esses aspectos mudaram nas famílias e tiveram impacto na violência contra as crianças, que foi visto no item, né, que fala justamente sobre isso. E a última fala seria aqui, olha, a maior conexão e vínculo com os pais e os filhos. Elas começaram a dizer assim, olha, uma mãe que após tratar mal a filha, refletiu e mudou sua abordagem. Ela mudou o falar, chegar em casa diferente e conversar com a filha é um ato de espiritualidade. Outra mãe passou a ler histórias com a filha, em vez de permitir que ela ficasse até tarde no celular, melhorou a sua rotina e reduziu atritos. E outro depoimento foi, de um encontro para o outro, eles conversaram sobre isso, eu pude melhor resolver o assunto em casa. E o interessante é que isso não foi só com a mãe, até mesmo o pai, o marido, participante, mudou o seu comportamento. Então a gente percebeu que é a comunidade reunida, toda, construindo uma nova maneira de cuidar das crianças. Era isso, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Shahnaz Kausar. Shahnaz, the floor is all yours.
Please. Yeah. Thank you so much, Francisco. And it was really an honor to be with this panel with experienced people. Good evening, everyone join this webinar. Today, I will briefly share how we implemented the spiritual development toolkit across Pakistan and how faith-based approaches can support children's holistic growth. As Francisco shared in detail what was the toolkit. So here how we implemented in Pakistan, spiritual development is not only about religious learning, it's about nurturing compassion, empathy, resilience, and strong moral foundation in children. As panelists already shared about the holistic development of child, just like when children feel spiritually connected, valued, and emotionally supported, they grow into confident, peaceful, and responsible human being. In the next few minutes, I will walk you through the project toolkit implemented in Pakistan and different approaches we used in our work with parents, teachers, and faith leaders especially, and the positive impact we observe in families and community across Pakistan. As it is mentioned in the, Francisco, can you do the next slide?
Sorry, Shahnaz, I'm not sharing. Yeah. Are you sharing? Do you want me to share for you?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Next slide, please. Yeah. Here in Pakistan, we implemented overall across the Pakistan, and we trained the trainers and facilitator to implement this project overall in Pakistan. Initially, 27 participants get this training from the Arigato International. And then after that, we trained the training of facilitators, and then 23 communities were trained in this, in which we trained 575 individuals. And then this training was implemented in different organizations. We trained the 17 organizations in Pakistan, and they further implemented this training in their institutions. And next slide, please. In Pakistan, we integrated in other projects as well across all the projects what Islamic belief is implemented in the Pakistan. So this training was also integrated in those projects where we're working with the communities. Yeah. And in this way, we implemented across Pakistan, and 2,300 children were benefited from this training. I think slide is disturbing us. I can move forward for this. Yeah. What the key approaches what we used in Pakistan, we grounded our toolkit training in 4 powerful approaches that truly connected with children, caregivers, teachers, and faith leaders. Francisco, you can manage the slides, just like I have a very short time. For the first and basic approach, what we adopted with that was a faith-based approach, and we built on the strength of faith and spirituality using religious values, stories, and teaching that naturally inspired compassion, protection, and positive behavior in children. They use the toolkit to deliver child-friendly protection, focused messages during the sermons and gathering, especially just like in Pakistan, being a Muslim community, this was addressed in Jummah khutbah, amplifying positive parenting across communities. So the second approach what we adopted in this project, that was participatory learning. Our sessions were highly interactive. Children, teachers, and faith leaders learned by doing through activities, discussion, and shared reflection that made the learning real and meaningful. And the third approach what we adopted, that was community-centered approach. We work with the community, not just in the community, parents, local leaders, teachers, and children all became active partners in creating a safer, more nurturing environment for children. And the final approach, what was really very necessary and important, that was holistic child development focus. We looked at the child as a whole, spiritual, emotional, and social and moral development, helping them grow with confidence, empathy, and resilience. So our training blended faith participation, community partnership, and holistic child development to create a meaningful and lasting impact across Pakistan. And how it linked with children, faith leaders, and teachers and parents. We tried to make a strong link among all these stakeholders. Our implementation approach created meaningful connection with every group involved in child spiritual and emotional development. So especially children. For children, the toolkit offered simple, engaging activity that strengthened their values, confidence, empathy, and understanding of right and wrong. It helped them connect their faith with daily positive actions. And also the most important segment of the society, that were the faith leaders. And the faith leaders become powerful partners in this project. The toolkit helped them communicate child-friendly messages during the sermons and community session, promoting protection, kindness, and spiritual growth from a trust-wise. As we see that the people listen to the faith leaders, and it's more effective rather than a common person is presenting these things. And also, being the Muslim country, we see that we believe that that our religion, and in every religion it's promote that the child protection is very important. So we get the beautiful example from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As we work on child spiritual development, our greatest inspirations come from the beautiful example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his interaction with children was rooted in mercy, respect, and deep emotional understanding. Just like we can share the example that he showed open affection when someone questioned why he kissed children. The Prophet reminded that showing mercy is a core Islamic value. This teaches that emotional warmth is not optional, it is part of our faith. And secondly, he respected the emotional word of children when he prayed while carrying his granddaughter, Mama. He showed us that children deserve patience, attention, and inclusion. Even during our most sacred acts, while we are doing, we can't ignore our children. So thirdly, he confirmed that he comforted children in their moments of sadness. When a little boy lost his pet bird, the Prophet personally visited and consoled him. This teaches to take children's feeling seriously and respond with compassion and with patience. These examples guide us today, building spiritually strong, emotionally safe, and confident children. So we also involve teachers, which is very, very important because children are learning from their institution, from the schools. So the teachers were also involved in this training, and the teachers used the toolkit to integrate moral and spiritual lesson into everyday classroom practices. It strengthened their role in guiding positive behavior and nurturing a safe, respectful learning environment. And obviously, parents were also involved in this training. For parents, it's creating awareness and strengthen positive parenting. They learn how to model compassion, discipline with respect, and create a nurturing home aligned with spiritual values. So all these four components and four caregivers are very important who were trained in this toolkit training. And the toolkit connects children, faith leaders, teachers, and parents to shared values, practical guidance, and unified vision of rising spiritually strong and emotionally safe. Also, we can see that what were the main impact of spiritual development on children. So I can say that it was a great impact. We can see that 2,300 children were benefited, and we have a lot of stories and we have a lot of case studies for this unique training. That I must say that impact of spiritual development children was that strengthened emotional well-being of children, also improved child parents relationship, just like positive parenting increases, harsh discipline decreases, parents become more attentive towards children, and emotional and spiritual needs were addressed through this training. And also better social behavior were adopted, strong moral and ethical development also occurred. Children understand right and wrong through compassion-based teaching. Values like honesty, responsibility, gratitude, and respect become part of daily life. And important of child protection were also just like it was before the intervention. Many families were not fully aware of the importance of child protection or the sign of abuse and neglect. After our awareness activities, there is a clear shift, and parents and teachers, they are aware about the child safety. Teachers and leaders now recognize sign of abuses. And we have so many case studies, and I'm sharing here 2 or 3. That one mother shared that instead of saying, "You are making me angry," she began asking, "How can we solve this together?" So the result was very good. That he shared that children became more open, cooperative, and confident, and the parents-child relationship strengthened through this project. The second example is also here. One woman, she was having 4 children, and she was facing some psychological issues, depression, like financial problem, and she shared that whenever her child made a small mistake, she would raise her voice and sometimes use physical punishment. The child obeyed immediately, but only out of fear, often hiding mistake or feeling anxious. After practicing positive discipline techniques, the same mother noticed that her child started taking responsibility for mistakes,
voluntarily and asking for guidance and showing confidence without the fear. So another example is also that is one of our right holder. She shared that after death of her husband, she was having children and she was very depressed and she was unable to fulfill her basic need. So due to all these problems, she was just shouting on her children and due to many issues. But after this training, she shared that there is a gradual change at her home, and now she's feeling a better environment at her home after practicing this spiritual training, and she utilized this at home. So at the end, I just say that this training was really very important, and we witnessed that there was a lot of change in the behavior of people. And I think that this shouldn't stop. It should be continue everywhere. And one thing I just want to share, that we are designing further training for our communities. But I used to utilize these training, especially the 4 connection which we build through this training. That was connection with divine, connection with nature, and also connection with the self and with communities and with your relatives. So this thing really made very unique for the community and very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shahnaz. And I'm well aware of time, but I would like to invite both you, Nelson, and Shahnaz to briefly give maybe a final recommendation for those who are listening us on maybe how they can implement or how they can move this work forward in their own organizations or communities. So, Nelson, you would like?
I think we have a great role as the religions community. You have to put our efforts to get a better environment for our children. That's all.
So I just say that when parents practice positive parenting, when teachers model empathy, and when faith leaders promote non-violence, and when communities stand together, children grow in an environment where their hearts, mind, and spirit flourish.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you for your kind words and also for sharing the experiences and the findings in both implementation processes in your countries and within your organizations. Thank you. And now to end this webinar today, I will give maybe the floor to Maria Lucia Uribe. I see you have unmuted yourself.
No, I didn't want to thank Francisco, but maybe just to thank everyone, thank Dr. Chauvin and our 3 first panelists, James, Selena, and Sabine, for the excellent reflections, but also Nelson and Shahnaz that brought it down to the implementation and your reflections from the local level and the communities. I think this is very powerful, and your own testimonies. I think this is important, but also want to thank all the participants for the reflections and comments on the chat, the excellent contributions, and I hope that this is a continuous dialogue that we can have. We'll have another webinar in February, March. We'll be announcing it soon as a continuation of this process. And for those who are interested to learn more about this toolkit, to learn more about how to implement it in your own institutions, in your community, please write to us. The email is on the chat, so you can be in touch with us and then we can share more. And if you're interested also to reach out to some of the speakers and learn more about the experiences, I think the emails were also shared, but if not, send us an email and we'll be able to share more details. And I think that closes. We are 8 minutes late, but thank you for staying with us until now. It has been a privilege also to be part of this webinar, and I thank everyone for their participation. Thank you.